This week on To the Contrary. First, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos booed during her commencement address at HBCU Bethune-Cookman. Then, where are the women crafting the Senate health care bill? And the stats about sexual assault on college campuses have many people scratching their heads. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, controversial commencement. Students' boos drowned out Education Secretary Betsy DeVos as she spoke at Bethune-Cookman University's commencement. Many graduating students at the historically black school also turned their backs in protest. The booing was so intense that the president of the school at one point interrupted the speech to urge students to be quiet. A local chapter of the NAACP had earlier called on the university's president to resign over the decision to invite DeVos. The education secretary is ramping up an attempt to reach out to HBCUs, but many students see it as an empty gesture due to the policies they say will harm minority and low-income schools. Students were also responding to DeVos's comments in February, in which she called HBCUs, quote, real pioneers when it comes to school choice. So, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, was this the right way to express their displeasure with Secretary DeVos, or was it rude?
At the very least, it was inevitable for a woman who insulted HBCUs, established because of racial segregation, not by choice.
It was rude and inappropriate. What are these kids learning if they think that the best way to engage in dialogue is not to listen?
The history of struggle for civil rights is marked by direct action, which gets the goods. It's rarely polite, and there's no need to apologize.
Well, Betsy DeVos may have had a better week, it sounds like, though, than FBI director, ex-FBI director James Comey, because this week, this mostly got swept under the rug as that took over all of Washington.
All right, but why does she get into so much trouble? This is not the first place where she's been booed. She, as her very first act as education secretary outside of the building, she tried to visit a D.C. school, right. And the students and teachers stood out in front and said, "We don't want you."
Sure.
Is it because she's a woman, or is it because she's extremely to the right as she is?
Well, there's a little bit of a backstory to what happened today. She had obviously said that these schools were pioneers of school choice, forgetting again, or at least not recognizing that this was founded because they had nowhere else to go. And what was very difficult for her this week as well is that the president had put this signing statement on a spending bill that really blindsided her. And I was told she was livid about it, targeting HBCUs as funding and suggesting that these guarantees that they get might not be constitutional. And so going into this, she already had that riding on her, and it was just a setup for a disaster for her.
And she had her initial appearance when she was trying to get confirmed. She got the worst vote of all of the nominees of this president because she performed so ignorantly and poorly. So from the get-go, right out of the box, she seemed not to know what she was talking about.
Her nomination and confirmation was historic. There was a tie-breaking vote that had never before happened on a cabinet-level appointee, where Pence cast the majority vote. But that said, she's now the secretary.
Well, wait, are you saying that's a good thing?
I'm acknowledging that did happen, and so she is a lightning rod, but she is now the Secretary of Education. And so for people to think that having sort of guerrilla-like actions to refuse to acknowledge her legitimacy, I find very troubling for our nation's institutions.
Could you not look at it, though, as, she has the right to speak. At least she got to speak, whereas Ann Coulter didn't even get to speak at Berkeley. But going to a place where you know your remarks are going to be controversial and you're not going to be really welcomed, then why don't the students have the right to to voice their views just as much as she has the right to come speak.
Well, they have the right to voice views, but I think the question is it appropriate to try to drown out a speaker, to keep them from speaking, and then prior to that, as you mentioned with Ann Coulter, to try to get somebody canceled? I don't think that that's a great way to express dissent, and it's certainly not one that I think our founders would have agreed with.
Well, what Betsy DeVos has said, particularly the comment about HBCUs and school choice, was so grossly offensive, and that layered on top of the fact that she's grossly incompetent and unqualified.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what does it say about her knowledge of American history?
Exactly, and it's an insult. It's an insult to students graduating from an HBCU to have someone who would make such a flagrant statement like that come on what is supposed to be their special day. And I think, this is about freedom of expression. I co-lead a direct action organization. I'm very comfortable with public protest. I think that public protest is something you have to do when all of your other options have been exhausted. And resisting Betsy DeVos is part of the resistance, and we're seeing this happening time and time again with members of his administration.
There's a difference between silencing and protest.
But I wanted to ask you, one of the president of the university said that Mary McLeod Bethune herself when founded the university with $1.50 or something back in the 1800s, and that she took sources of money from the left and the right, people whose voices or opinions she didn't necessarily agree with. Right. He made it sound like he invited her because he wanted to get more money out of this administration. Did it work?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. I can't speak to his motivations. But what I can say is that there is a difficulty, I think, for any university in choosing commencement speakers, because you want to get someone who's very high profile, but you also don't want someone who's going to court controversy and ruin students' special day. So I think in this particular situation, there is a question about whether or not the university was perhaps wise to not just invite her, but to invite anyone who may have been a lightning rod for controversy. But also, as far as the administration is concerned, I'm sure they certainly saw this as an opportunity to go to a school and speak to some students and speak to people that probably did not vote for Donald Trump and get their message out, particularly after her previous comments about HBCUs and the way that some of the things that President Trump has also said have been interpreted.
Do you think President Jackson will be able to avoid the cuts? I mean, was this a move in your eyes to make nice with the administration that clearly is going to cut back on funding for HBCUs, and will it help him at all?
The blowback seems to me to be all on him. People call for his resignation now. I don't support silencing anyone. I have to ask all of you, what should they have done? One thing, the main thing they did was get up and turn their backs. This is a untold and long-held way of protesting. Whose day is this anyway? Is it for the president of the university trying to make sure that money comes to him, which is what it looks like, even if it isn't? Or is it for the students who are having a unique day? Seems to me he wasn't thinking about his own students.
The students were drowning out her speech as she was trying to speak, and at one point the president had to intervene and ask the students to allow her to speak, which is definitionally silencing. I personally don't think it would be an issue if students wanted to express their opinions by turning their backs. That seems respectful, but to keep someone from speaking seems to go against the entire point of higher education.
But to speak about the funding, I was just going to say, after that signing statement that I originally mentioned, I do want to note that the president did come back and say, I did not mean that specifically to target HBCUs. I have broad support for them. And also previously in his administration, he signed an executive order prioritizing the HBCU initiative and actually bringing it out of the Department of Education to the White House.
Yeah, but it had no money behind it.
No, that didn't. That part did not have money behind it.
Just a moment.
That was supposed to be symbolic. Go ahead.
He said it was unconstitutional. He said HBCUs were unconstitutional. That also is an insult. They've been open to white people from the beginning. It's only white institutions that have not been open to the HBCUs, which is how they got started in the first place.
All right, let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or @To the Contrary. From students to Republican women senators and health care. Senate Republicans are defending their all-male health care working group this week. With 13 members on the panel, there's not a single woman. Maine Senator Susan Collins was left off the team despite her health care expertise. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says, quote, nobody is being excluded by gender, and, quote, the group that counts is all 52 of us, referring to the Republican senators. The committee also brings attention to the limited role that women play in the Republican caucus, making up just 10% of Republican senators. Comparatively, women comprise 1/3 of the Democratic caucus. Among the 21 female senators, 5 are Republicans. So, Anneke, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, first of Maine, second of Alaska, have both been dissenting voices in this Congress against the Trump administration and against what the Republican leadership is trying to accomplish in some situations. Are they being punished, particularly Collins, who has a background in health care?
I don't think they're being punished. I think that what happened was that the Republican leadership didn't think about what it might look like. We saw some quotes from GOP leadership aides saying, well, yeah, that's a bad optic. And then after this was raised by female reporters, they came back and said these meetings are open to any of the 5 female Republican senators when they want to come according to their schedule.
Yeah, I do think that they're being punished. And it's not because she's a woman. She is the reigning expert among the Republicans on health care. She's being punished because she is a moderate Republican. And she doesn't, for the most part, agree with what is happening with health care now. It's political, not related to her gender.
What specifically is Collins' position? Does she want to keep the ACA?
She doesn't want to keep it, but she'd allow some states to make a choice. This notion of moderation goes throughout her service in the Senate.
What does the White House expect the Senate will come back with by way of the ACA, and how is it going to be different than it would have been if Collins and Murkowski or some of the other female senators were involved in pulling it together?
They haven't really been acknowledging that it could come back vastly different than the bill that was passed in the House. Because to acknowledge that would be to say that what they had in the House was not as big of a victory as the president said it was when they took this, big victory lap in the Rose Garden. But what could happen in the Senate is that there could be major changes specifically to the Medicaid aspect of it. Of the bill. There was the big expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare, and a lot of the senators that we're talking about want to keep it because their states participated in
Medicaid expansion.
Yes, they want to keep the expansion because their states benefited from it. So West Virginia's female senator, who is also a Republican as well, falls in that category. And so if you have them in the working group, they might push for changes that would make it harder for the bill that passes in the Senate to be reconciled with the bill that passes in the House. It gets complicated. But I'll also add that there are male Republican senators who agree with them on that position. Rob Portman is one of them. And so there are men in the Senate who also take that position.
Do you expect maternity care to be put back in this bill by the Senate?
Well, 13 dudes going to do it? I don't know. I mean, Trump Care seems to be just a mean-spirited attack on women from every level, from the attempts to strip maternity coverage out, the attacks on preventive care, Medicaid expansion, which disproportionately supports women, especially single mothers.
And I want to jump in. It must be viewed by some as kind of strange that they want to take away abortion rights, they want to take away now birth control coverage, and when you do get pregnant, you would think they would want to pay for maternity coverage so that the babies are healthy, but no, they're taking away maternity coverage. So you want to have a baby, you better have $17,000 handy.
Yeah, no, I mean, this whole conservative pro-life thing is the biggest pile of hypocrisy in the United States in some ways, right? Because, I mean, it's just totally going after women and not supporting them in terms of preventing pregnancy, supporting them through their pregnancies. Really, the only focus is on making sure people are born. But one thing about this Senate panel that I find, or the Senate grouping that I find particularly concerning, so out of the Republican caucus, specifically, 1 in 10 senators is a woman. So if there's 13 people in this grouping, theoretically there should be 1 or 2 women included. So there's absolutely no excuse for this, and I think Mitch McConnell has some answering to do.
What do you think about does it make sense from a conservative perspective that you would deny abortion? Of course, yes. birth control, and then maternity coverage all at the same time?
The governing philosophy here is that there are things that are not the government's role, and that Obamacare expanded a lot of things into the government's role that hadn't previously been there. And so now they want to have the discussion be, well, you're taking these things away from people. Well, not really. And the result of doing that in the first place has been that people have lost options, their premiums have been higher, and I find it more hypocritical as a woman to be told that I need the government to look out for me. It doesn't seem that much different from being told you need a man to look out for you.
But if you have health insurance and you get pregnant, would you not be kind of shocked that your maternity care isn't covered?
Well, I think that it should be under most insurance plans, but if it's not, I mean, that belongs on the private side of things, in the market. And the less you allow the market to compete, the fewer options you have. And that's what we've seen.
Eleanor?
The theory of health insurance is that most of the benefits most of us need will be there for us. It isn't even insurance any longer. If you can pick and choose, you need to put the whole class together, then it's cheaper for everybody.
Well, and do you think what will eventually come out of Congress will include maternity care?
I would predict that nothing will come out of Congress. I hate to put it that way. I think we would have been better without the House bill. To get the Senate, which is even more divided than the House, don't think anything is going to happen.
Well, so, I mean, that's been said, but then again, the leadership has come out and said, no, we're going to have a response.
What else could they say?
Well, but then how are they going to explain it when, and will it be in part due to the fact that there were no women on that committee pulling together the Senate bill?
Remember, I said because there were no moderates on that committee. So what are they going to do when a bill comes forward that they have disagreed with from the beginning? So I think that what will happen is you won't have a bill that comes out and then you'll go to conference. They'll just stretch it out, particularly after the 2018, till after the 2018 elections.
I think that
what if, as progressives have been saying, they want a woman on the panel or more than one woman on the panel, but what if, for example, Jody Ernst from Iowa, who's pretty far right, had been on the panel? Would that have made a difference in whatever the Senate does or doesn't craft as health care?
I don't think that it would have necessarily made a difference if she specifically had been on the panel. But I wanted to say that I have to agree with you that when you look at what the Senate has to take up, they're supposed to pass infrastructure. They're also supposed to pass a tax bill. Now they have to confirm a new FBI director. There's a lot on their plate here, and they can't agree on this health care bill. The chances of something that comes out that will become law are not looking too good right now.
All right, from healthcare to sexual assault.
Feels like something's rotten in Denmark, doesn't it?
The American Association of University Women says new data about sexual assault on campus doesn't tell the whole story. In the survey, 89% of college campuses reported 0 incidences of rape in 2015. AAUW says if that were true, that would be cause for celebration. But with stats showing 1 in 5 college women is going to be sexually assaulted, something is wrong.
To be fair, it is a crime that is underreported for all kinds of reasons that your viewers know. But the reality, too, though, is that because of the Clery Act, colleges and universities are supposed to report basic kind of crime statistics. And we're concerned when you have this many zeros, when you know it's happening, that there's in fact something wrong with the system, that individual colleges don't have basically the infrastructure in place, nor potentially the welcoming attitude that encourages students to report.
Lisa Matt says the information is important. It's used to plan for violence prevention, response, and assistance for sexual assault survivors. That's why data collection expanded under the Violence Against Women Act.
This is the second year that we're collecting new information on the incidence of domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. And we know that that's happening at epidemic levels on college campuses as well, but we're still seeing 0 reports. So the reality is we're not just talking about campus sexual assault, but quite frankly, the whole range of violence against women that needs better attention on campus.
So 89% of campuses reporting no sexual assault, and then you look at the news and it's all campus rape, but it seems like there's lots of it going on at every school. How do you put those two together.
Yeah, it's clearly wrong, right? So there's no way that we can believe that nearly 90% of our nation's universities had 0 sexual assaults occurring on campus. This is not hysteria. The focus that's been on sexual assault on campus. In fact, it's typically around 1 in 5 women in college will experience some form of sexual assault. So I think what we really need to do is schools need to step up. They need to create a more welcoming environment for reporting. There need to be consequences for reporting. They need to look at the way that they're collecting the data. A lot of times the ways that we ask the questions can lead to the wrong answers coming about. And they also need to look at how they're reporting out their statistics. We need to see a big change. Admitting a problem is the first step that we have to correcting a problem.
Anneke.
I'm very interested in making sure we have the right data and that it's reliable. One of the things that I've been concerned about is when I've read that some of the data on campus rapes isn't right, like the 1 in 5 statistic that came about from a Department of Justice survey that extrapolated based on only 1.7% of respondents filling out the full survey to what if they had completed the survey, what would they have said? Now we have 1 in 5 women on campus will be raped. That creates a climate of fear and can obscure when there really is a problem and a woman has experienced a sexual assault.
So what do you think, why the difference then?
The difference in statistics?
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's tricky. I mean, first of all, it's extremely personal. And I think when someone experiences that, a lot of the studies say that a woman feels a lot of shame and she takes it on herself and she blames herself. And a lot of victims don't want to report. And then I think that this isn't necessarily the case on college campuses. I think it varies campus by campus. But I know that in the judicial system, the prospect of how a victim is going to be handled, how she's interviewed, debriefed, is her rape kit processed? Is she going to have to face this person in court? Can a loan keep somebody from going through with the process, even if they go ahead and report it in the first place?
Bonnie, this is not going away the way we're going at it. I don't think the universities are lying. I do not believe women are coming forward. There is no deterrent. There is no enforcement. When it is reported, countless incidents of nothing happening to the man. I think women, instead of relying on forces outside of themselves, are going to have to take this unto themselves. Just this week, 5 Howard University students sued the university because they had been raped or sexually assaulted by fellow students or even by staff. Unless women come forward and take ownership of this problem, the problem is going to remain with us, Bonnie.
Well, but how about the difference in the data? Where do you think that's coming from? From shame about reporting or from universities not doing their job in collecting it?
I think it's coming from the fact that we don't have anonymous surveys. If you were to do a survey, you wouldn't have to put your name to it. That's when I think you'd get the best data. And we need every university to do these anonymous surveys and see what we come up with.
Do you think there's any chance that because of the huge publicity this topic has been getting in the last, 2015 was the year that we're talking about that the survey was based on, but is there any chance stats are going down now because there's so much more publicity on this topic?
I see the stats going up, and then of course this is only judged by the day-to-day reports, but it looks like predators are getting bolder. Show me the enforcement. I don't see much of that. When you have as widespread a crime, and that's what it is, as rape and sexual assault is, you've got to have the only deterrent that the law knows, and that is you do it, at least some of you will in fact be held accountable for it.
I think speaking as a reporter here, the difficulty is if someone isn't reporting a crime and you are a reporter who covers crime, like I was in college, I did that for a semester, and I actually had to cover this very issue, that's all that you can go off of. You can only go off of the police reports, or as you were saying, surveys that the universities would be doing, or a Department of Justice statistic, whether or not you think that that's right. And so,
did you do any digging to find out, particularly on this topic, whether women were reluctant to come forward?
And absolutely you can, but then you also get into the fact of whether or not, as a reporter, you're able to do something that I would consider scientific. If you go up and ask 100 people on campus. But also, I think that an anonymous survey would be a lot more something that people would be willing to answer than telling a reporter, oh yes, by the way, I didn't want to talk to the police about this, but I would happily talk to you about it. So I think that that's why all of the things that everyone has said at the table here are things that I think would be helpful.
All right, terrific. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter. Visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.